Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Ruby Rogues podcast. I'm your host, Charles Max Wood, and this week's panel is, in no particular order, Avdi Grimm. He is the author of Exceptional Ruby. He blogs at avdi.org/devblog, and you can find him on Twitter as @Avdi. Welcome, Avdi.
Hello again.
We also have Gregory Brown from Ruby Mendicant University. He is the author of the Prawn Library Ruby Best Practices, and has a lot of experience helping developers kind of go from that beginner or intermediate stage and move up. So welcome, Greg.
Hey.
We also have from Shiny Systems, David Brady. Shiny Systems is his company, and are you still hiring, Dave?
Actually, I've got some really interesting developments going on this weekend. I am trying very hard to hire somebody, and trying also to avoid getting hired outright. Apparently when you challenge the universe challenges back.
All right, so you can check him out. He blogs at Heart Mind Code. He and Pat Maddox have an awesome podcast at addcasts.com.
Yep.
And he is also the author of the Tour Bus Library for load testing your application. So welcome, Dave.
And I'm at dbrady on Twitter.
At dbrady on Twitter. All right. We also have Josh Susser. Josh is one of the organizers of the Gogaruko, the Golden Gate Ruby Conference. He blogs at hasmanythrough.com. You can find him on Twitter at Josh Susser. He's contributed to the Ruby on Rails library some, and as we've said before, he has 7 patents, which I think is rather unusual for software developers. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you. Good to be here.
And we also have we have a one more than we normally have. We have James Edward Gray. James is the author of the TextMate book. He ran the Ruby Quiz for a while and wrote the Best of Ruby Quiz. He wrote the Faster CSV library, and you can find him on Twitter as JEG2. Welcome, James.
Thanks. Glad to be back.
And I'm Charles Max Wood. I have screencasts and a podcast at teachmetocode.com. I'm also the host of the Rails Coach podcast and this podcast. And you can find me at teachmetocode.com. I'm on Twitter as @CMaxW. All right. Well, welcome, everybody. This week, as we said last time, we're going to be talking about metaprogramming. This is one of the topics that was requested on the Ruby Rogues website. And it seems like you guys have some ideas of where you want to go with it. So I'm going to turn it over and just let whoever wants to jump in get the ball rolling.
So I thought an awesome question to start us off is, what is metaprogramming?
Ooh, there's a deep one.
What a meta question.
Right.
Yeah, since this is all meta, we're just going to sit here and think about the answers for a while.
Cha-ching!
Can we think about thinking about the answers?
Whoa! Getting deep.
Let's not get carried away here.
Okay, so I'll try an answer. This is Josh. Metaprogramming is programming other programs.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what I always used to define it as, was code that writes code. Although I kind of think Ruby blurs that line in a lot of areas.
Yeah, I think that the question is going to depend on whether you're talking about metaprogramming in general or metaprogramming in Ruby, because metaprogramming takes on I think a more broader meaning in other languages, where in Ruby I always tend to think about the metaprogramming functionality as just an API for dynamic programming within Ruby itself.
I always thought of it as basically you writing code that defines other programmatic constructs.
So this is going to be a fun day today, because for me, metaprogramming is almost always, I mean, a lot of us will probably talk about like DSLs and that kind of thing, but for me, metaprogramming is largely about monkey patching and duck punching and donkey patching, which is, programming other people's programs for them, whether they want you to do it or not. But then in Ruby, I love the take. I think it was Giles Poquet that wrote, he blogged about it and basically said, there's no such thing as metaprogramming. There's just programming.
So let's try a concrete example to see if we can zero in. Like in Rails, where you have your has many and belongs to, or validates numericality of, which is so popular. Are those metaprogramming?
Well,
I don't think
metaprogramming.
So. I don't think of them as metaprogramming. They're just class methods.
So I think that things like the associations has many, that those things, I do classify those as metaprogramming in their implementation. Using them, it looks just like an API, but when you call has many, when you have a has many method in your class, has many comments, then that defines a bunch of methods on your class. So you get the comment
that's true.
method. Yeah,
Right, that's what I was thinking about. I was thinking about how from the outside in, you can't actually necessarily tell. Like I would consider it metaprogramming if it actually defines methods or otherwise messes with structures. But say, for example, it was just storing, like if you had a class method that takes blocks and then stores those blocks and calls them later, I don't know that I would consider that metaprogramming.
So that's interesting. By that definition Greg just gave, the association methods are metaprogramming, but the validation methods would not be metaprogramming.
So if it generates a class or generates a method.
What about method missing?
I was going to ask that. Because effectively you
Sorry,
are
go
changing...
ahead and ask that.
well, you're effectively modifying the interface, right? I mean, it accepts a message that it wouldn't have accepted otherwise if you monkey around with method missing, but you're not defining a method itself.
You're not defining a method. All you're doing is you're saying my interface is extremely promiscuous.
Well,
or is that permissive?
Okay, so that doesn't define methods for you. That just changes the way that dispatch works.
Right.
And then the question is, if method missing is a form of metaprogramming, then you need to sort of think of send as also being a form of metaprogramming in a way. They sort of go together. And I don't know that I feel that those things, like I actually am of the opinion that there really is no such thing as metaprogramming in Ruby, at least. I just think of them as APIs that do various dynamic things. And I think that they're actually entirely different sort of things. Like I feel that defining a method and defining a hook for when a method doesn't exist are two very different things.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe for a working definition for today, maybe we could agree on something like some chunk of code that modifies the object structure, in ways like adding methods or responding to methods or things like that, making new classes available, possibly.
Basically,
what about rewrite?
Yeah,
What about Reg's rewrite, which actually does do kind of metaprogramming in a more classical sense, where it's generating new code, rewriting.
Right, that's the question about code generation and whether code generation should be considered metaprogramming. I think it would actually be more productive to talk about, including all of the concepts of when we write code to, make modifications to our code dynamically that would ordinarily be done by, something explicit. So metaprogramming is always implicit and dynamic. And its goal is to provide a more generalized way to do something that could have been done statically.
Right. Basically, if it's something that will blow, this is David. If it's something that will blow the mind of a Java programmer, I consider it metaprogramming.
That's awesome.
So the entire Lisp language is metaprogramming.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
Uncontested. Yes.
All right, so let's try a new question. Let's come at it from a new angle. Wait, it's clear we have no idea what we're talking about today. We spent 10
which is
minutes
fantastic.
discussing it.
No, we have established that is a very important fact. We have established that we cannot define what this is. So that's the first thing you need to know about metaprogramming.
So you just got the meta definition for metaprogramming.
Basically.
That's right.
Well, if you take it from the thing that all of Lisp is metaprogramming, if you say programs that treat code as data.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
But by that definition, I can think of quite a few block scenarios just using Ruby's blocks that I think would qualify as metaprogramming.
So why don't we just change the topic to code as data and then just roll with that?
But Ruby doesn't do code as data.
It doesn't. It's not a
interesting. Why do you say that, Avdi?
Well, I mean, you cannot interrogate a Ruby class and say give me the well, you can't say give me the bytecode for your methods, and you also can't say give me the AST for your methods, and you can't even say give me the text of your methods like you can with I think most JavaScript implementations.
You can get the source code.
Actually, that's not true in Run 9, is it?
No, it's not true. You can get source code, you can get AST, you can get all of that.
Can you ask an object for it, or do you need to load in Ripper?
Well, I mean, Ripper is a standard library, so.
Okay.
I think you can actually get the source itself without Ripper. They now have a
source location method.
Source location. That's a little different.
You're right.
Especially if it's been especially if the source has been generated or changed at runtime. That's not going to give.
Yeah, where you have a list of symbols that get mapped out into defined method, then you get that location, and you're like, oh, this is just a for loop. I don't really see the source code here.
I do believe you
about
can.
The source code stuff. Now, so I guess let me think about this. The source code stuff definitely works if you've got something that's in a file, and then you can get the source because you can get the source location and then parse it from there. But if you're dynamically generating code, could you get the source back? Probably not without some sort of Ripper hack on that, and I'm not even sure that you could do it. I'm not sure.
And you still can't marshal code in Ruby.
That's correct. There's a very good reason for that. The concept of a block in Ruby is a closure. So
exactly.
How do we properly marshal a closure and then bring it back with all that state?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Ruby,
yeah. Great
you could
difficulty.
I've actually considered forking Ruby just to add two little changes to it, which is that everything should be treated as an expression and should return its value. Therefore, when you issue the class statement, when you say class pig truck, when you type end, that should evaluate, and you should get back the definition of that class. And the same thing when you define a method with def foo, once you're done, you should get back a proc object. And Ruby doesn't do that. It returns nils from both of those evaluations, which is unfortunate.
So I have a question on that then, Dave. If you monkey patch something then, would it return the value of whatever it is that you monkey patched, like the new class definition or whatever?
In that case, I don't know that I definitely don't have the chops to just monkey patch Ruby straight. I think you'd actually have to fork Ruby and change the source code. I think.
So let's move on to a different angle outside of definitions.
Yeah.
I thought another interesting question might be, do you see too much or too little metaprogramming in Ruby?
Yes.
Definitely too much all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I halfway agree.
Every use of metaprogramming that I see is either wrong or has an equivalent that's less confusing. Then
So
again, I work with intermediate and beginner developers mostly.
Yeah.
So that's an
it's-
interesting point. You think we have a tendency maybe to reach for the big tools when there's a simpler tool that would do?
I like power tools.
Yeah, but they're so easy.
I did a lot more metaprogramming before I got more experience with Ruby.
Yeah.
So Dave, you were saying too much and too little.
And too little. Yeah, it's I don't know. I talk to a lot of people that see metaprogramming as just black or white. It's either completely evil and we should get rid of it, or it's God's gift to mankind and we should use it for everything. And it really is a Swiss Army knife. The beauty of metaprogramming is once you figure out how to do it meta, you don't have to write regular code anymore because you can just do it metaprogramming. And that's, I think, touches on what Greg's mentioning, that, oh yeah, you figure out how to solve this problem using metaprogramming. But you know what? There's actually a really straightforward way to do it in the language, and it would be nice if you just take the time to go learn the library and do it that way. But at the same time, I also see a lot of people just really sweating and breaking their heads trying to write something in a straightforward manner because metaprogramming is either difficult or unavailable. One of my big problems with RDoc for a long time is that if you metaprogram something up, there's not really any way to document that. Like if you have code generation, you actually have to generate static code and static documentation, or RDoc can't see it.
That's an interesting point, and at times I've actually argued that's a feature that maybe if your code is so clever RDoc can't read it, then maybe that's a hint, you know?
Yeah. Well, it is a hint. It's a hint that RDoc isn't smart enough.
Well, I'm not sure it's that hint.
That,
Well, I think
beyond
that's actually a. Oh, go ahead.
this is Josh. I was going to say that's actually a problem or a characteristic of Ruby that makes it difficult to build a good development environment.
Yes.
When people run around and dynamically create methods and classes and new pieces of code, and those things don't live in files somewhere, and people don't declare where the source of or location of bits of newly created code are, it makes it really hard to. There's no way to do static analysis of your program and figure out where all the methods live and are defined, so you can't build a browser. Smalltalk, all the program structures lived in memory in the image, so you could build a browser that knew everything was.
I was going to mention Smalltalk, and specifically for that, because it's very dynamic, but it's got a fantastic set of tools. I'm very excited to see Ruby moving towards more of an AST reflection, that sort of thing. And yeah, if we can get the ability to grab a running system and query its object structures, ooh, tingly. That's just great. I would love that.
I have to ask my noob question now. I'm vaguely familiar what an AST is, but I am not familiar enough to have enough context to completely follow what you guys are saying.
Abstract syntax tree. It's the graph of the code broken down into like a flowchart, into a tree, basically, data structure, reflecting what the code is, what the source code compiles into, basically, what objects in memory, what instructions have to happen in what order.
So just to give a super simple example, if you have a statement like 1 plus 2, it generally compiles into a tree with the plus at the top and a 1 on the left under it and a 2 on the right underneath it, meaning do this plus operation on these two operators. Mm-hmm. Also, that's used in a lot of areas. It's not, we tend to think of it just as programming and stuff like that, but the changes that Aaron made to Rails 3's, where order type methods on Active Record, basically all he did was have those methods build an abstract syntax tree so that then he could walk that tree and translate it to SQL.
Yep. Usually ASTs are used as an intermediate representation for a program in the compilation process. Mm-hmm. You look at the source code, you parse it out, you create an abstract syntax tree, and once you have the AST, you can generate the bytecode or the machine code that you need to execute the program.
Right.
It's probably worth noting that in a Ruby AST, the 1 plus 2, and correct me if this is not quite right, but the 1 plus 2 is more likely to be, the top of the tree is method call, and then the name, the 1 is the receiver, and the plus is the method, and the 2 is the first argument.
Yeah, I did simplify it a bit much.
Yeah. The other advantage, specifically looking forward from ASTs, what this would give us if you could reach into a running object system and grab its AST, is you could create an object, spin it off into memory, and then you could monkey patch the class or monkey patch that object, or you could delete the source code. And this is how Smalltalk works. You could change the source code, but that object's still hanging out in memory based on old source code. But you could still grab its syntax tree and interrogate that object and say, oh, you know what? You don't match the source code that you were supposedly built from because you're older, but you're still a running real object, and now I can actually step in and kind of debug you through your syntax tree.
So now this is interesting. We've talked multiple times about getting the syntax tree. I believe 1.9 does give you methods to on the VM to compile to the bytecode, but I do not think it gives you the syntax tree. I need to. Well, Ripper kind of does, right? Ripper kind of does, I think. Yeah. So that's one way, and I believe Rubinius may have some capabilities there.
It does.
Rubinius has stuff, but Ripper itself, the problem with Ripper, we played around with it as one of the exercises that many people university. And the more we looked into it, like the way that Ripper is set up right now, it's not really meant to be used as a general way to access the AST. And so there's like weird things about the way that it does stuff that introduce ambiguities that make it sort of impossible to have it go round trip.
Can we talk about guidelines for metaprogramming a little bit?
Absolutely. Let's do it. Go ahead.
So this just kind of occurred to me as we were having this discussion. One guideline I'd put out there is if you are redefining methods or aliasing methods, you are probably doing it wrong. If you are generating modules, you are probably doing it right.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed.
Okay, but with emphasis on probably.
Well, yeah, but I mean, there are always exceptions.
Yes.
But I see many. I mean, the classic example of this was the alias method chain that you saw all throughout Rails up until 3, where a lot of times methods were being redefined, aliased and redefined, when you could have used dynamic module generation to do it in a much cleaner way, where you'd still have access to super, so the methods could just cleanly call the original definition, but you're inserting a module that puts the new definition in.
That's fairly clever. Now, can you stub out super? This is something I found in Smalltalk last week.
No, I don't think so.
Is that there is absolutely no fear of subclassing in Smalltalk, and we do see a little bit of fear of subclassing in Ruby. We see a lot more monkey patching than we do subclassing, I think, and inheritance. And part of it is I don't think you can stub super, but in Smalltalk you can. You can tell
when
that
you
object,
say stubs
for like testing. Basically, I'm gonna call new on fixnum, and it's gonna call super up into integer, but I'm testing something, not a fixnum.
What you can do
are bad examples because they're in the standard library. But the idea is to basically say, when you call super, nothing happens. I'm not going to let you go up the chain.
What you can do, so when I'm testing stuff like that, I'm usually I create a module, or not an object to insert my module into. But what you can do is you can actually ask Ruby if super is defined. And not too many people know this, but you can say the Ruby has the defined operator, which is not a method; it is an operator. And if you can actually say defined super, and that will tell you in any method dynamically whether there is a super to be called. So you can say super if defined super, kind of like you say yield if block given.
I just learned a new trick.
That's Now, can you then undefine super? No, because you have to be inside the context of a method, don't you?
Right.
Rats.
I want to go back to what Avdi's been saying, though, because I actually believe this is a really important point. And if you've seen any of my talks at conferences, I bring this up a lot. Ruby's method call system is really important, and you have to get your head around it at some point about how it does these lookups. And what Avdi is saying is eventually you realize that Ruby's method call system is a straight line, and which stops along the way. And what makes it beautiful is that once you get the hang of it, and once you get the hang of modules, especially things like extend and include, then you realize that you can put a module at any point on that line.
Yeah. So, almost, that's right. There are a couple of very minor exceptions. But usually you can put a module at any point on that line. And what's great about that is that means you can put modules at the front of the line. So you can do things like around filters, right? Do something a little before, call this method, do something after, blah, blah, blah. Or you can, when David asks, can you stub out super? Well, sure. Put a module between the point where super is going to be called and the thing above it, right?
That's really slick.
So, yeah, sure, you can.
That's cool.
So the tricky thing there is, and I think one of the reasons that we saw alias method chain in Rails 2 a lot is that if you have a method in the leaf class that you're looking at, and it's not been built in a way to allow for extensibility, it doesn't call super, maybe, then there's no way that you can go and insert something above it to compose in some behavior.
Yeah.
Now, with Ruby, you can call extend on the instance and smash some behavior onto that will override the methods defined in the class of that instance. So that's one approach.
And thank you for noting that, because a lot of people don't realize that.
That was the concern that I was going to point out as well, that basically, Abdi, the guideline that you gave is completely valid, assuming that everybody plays nice.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of old rule in Ruby that unfortunately gets forgotten a lot, which is calling super is usually a good idea. Like Ruby is one of those languages. A lot of languages in the the class initialization or the object initialization, they just automatically do superclass initialization for you. So if you've got constructors in all your superclasses, they'll just automatically call those things. Ruby says you can decide whether to call those superclass. Those superclass constructors or not, and so there's just this guideline that you have to remember, which is that unless you have a really good reason not to, always call super in initialize, and that really goes for a lot of other methods as well.
Right. I mean, I think it's because Ruby splits out the concept of object creation into, you basically allocate is called on the class, and then initialize is an instance method that gets called. And Ruby separates out the concept of the object creation and sort of the hook provided to the user to set some data. So it's Ruby constructors are not proper constructors in the sense of a lot of other languages, or at least
a lot of languages do that. It may be a little bit more hidden, but a lot of languages do that same kind of thing.
Right, but I guess the point that I'm making about like the sort of idea of naturally calling super is a little bit strange in Ruby, because the hook that you're defining is this, by definition, user-defined hook. You're not typically messing directly with a constructor.
It's nice, though, being able to control the sequencing of things in your initialize method, that you can do a little work, call super at the right moment, and then do a little work after it.
Yeah.
So basically, by injecting these modules, it's almost like giving you like the advice from Lisp, right? Like where you can define an advice, which is basically just a wrapper around a method. That is very cool.
So,
and just to hit home how important this point is we've been talking about right here. I mean, I hate to be like, you really got to learn this, but you really do, because if you want to know what happened between Rails 2 and Rails 3, they rewrote pretty much the guts and internals of Rails to do exactly what we've just been talking about for the last 8 minutes or so. So this is really important. This is you reach a point where you realize that this is how Ruby's supposed to work, and once it works that way, you have a lot of power over what you can do with the system, and that's very important.
That is very cool.
So I have a question. With the dynamic module generation that we've been talking about, I definitely see where this applies within, say, a class, but within the main context and defining classes within, dynamically defining classes, does this same concept apply, and how is that?
So you're saying if you're just defining classes normally and stuff?
No, if you're dynamically defining a class, then you're not going to generate a module to generate the class, right?
I see what you're saying. So like if you're doing some trick and summoning objects out of the ether or something?
So for example, I did some playing with Rack, and I dynamically defined some middleware to help manage some of the routing and dispatching that I was doing with the requests that were coming in. And so I was just dynamically defining classes within the methods that I had added to the main context of the program. And so we were talking about dynamic module generation within the sense of adding this stack or adding these levels, and adding functionality to classes. But do you do the same thing with the main context of the program itself?
Well, I don't know that it makes a difference. I mean, I think that a dynamically generated class is basically, in the end, the same as a regular class. So you could apply this technique if it made sense. I mean, we were mostly talking about, say you wanted to add behavior to or change the behavior of an existing object.
Right.
Using modules for extension makes sense there. If you're talking about creating classes dynamically, like, For example, I mean, camping used to have those like weird routes that would basically take a regex and then turn it into like a controller object for you, a controller class. I don't know where modules come into play. I mean, they might, but if they did, it would be the same way that you would work with regular classes. So I think they're just two separate concepts.
Okay.
Unless I'm misunderstanding something.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I understood that there was a difference between the two.
Yeah, I just don't find myself generating classes very often. It does happen, but much less often than I generate modules.
Well, do you use RSpec?
I do.
You generate classes all the time, then.
No, RSpec does. What I'm saying is I'm not. Actually, RSpec does. I think does probably. Well, they do. I think they do a fair amount of module generation as well. But the point being, I'm not writing module generation, or rather class generation, that often.
Right, but it's almost always that use case where you have some sort of program where you want to have some domain language and you basically want to hide the class creation. So, RSpec does that. If, like, I've got some helpers that I use on top of mini test that when you say context actually creates a subclass of the test case class, that sort of thing. But it's typically used just for that. So, I mean, normally dynamic class generation is just syntactic sugar is when I've seen it used.
Yeah. Plus, even in cases like that, sometimes I'll do something more along the lines of generate a module and then create a generic object and stick my module into it. Just because, that gives me, I can then take that module generation and I can do something else with it as well. I can throw it into something and test it or something.
So David, let me jump in here for a second. David, sure. You've been playing with Smalltalk lately.
Yes.
Have you discovered ThingLab?
No, I have not.
ThingLab was the first really mind-blowing thing I ever saw done in Smalltalk, and this was back in the mid '80s. Giving a hint about how out of date I am about a lot of this stuff. ThingLab was a simulation environment built in Smalltalk, and it's really worth looking up and reading about it because it was so awesome.
I'll check it out.
I think
I'll check it out.
Yeah, Randy Smith was the guy behind that. But they had it was an object-oriented simulation environment, and you could do physics-type simulations in it. And one of their classic simulations was walking in the rain, where you would see if you walked slower or faster, would you get wetter or stay drier? And
right.
The way that they did this was that you would create objects through some UI, and okay, I got a box and I give it some velocity and all that. And as you did things and added behavior to the simulation, it was generating new classes and generating methods within those classes to embody the simulation. So that was an incredibly great use of metaprogramming, and it took a lot of work for them to do it, given the kind of primitive nature of metaprogramming that was available in Smalltalk.
Yeah. So I have a kind of a follow-on question from that. We've talked a little bit about when not to metaprogram, and we've talked about how to metaprogram. I kind of want to throw out the question of why. Why would you metaprogram? What cases would you do it? Like I know when I monkey patch, I know why I do it. But I'm curious to ask you guys, when do you metaprogram?
That's a really good question. I think that's one that that's the one that people fail to ask themselves before they actually make use of metaprogramming. That leads to bad metaprogramming.
I have one answer for that is sort of from a language implementer's point of view, and that's that the virtual machine or the runtime implementation of a language is optimized to perform certain kind of operations really well. So, like method lookup in an object-oriented language is this really heavily optimized thing because it's at the heart of everything that you're doing. And it's pretty much just like a case statement. So that's a really great thing to do if you can generate code that takes advantage of the language's implicit ability to do really fast method dispatch, then you win. And that's a lot faster than building data structures within the language and using case statements or conditionals. So it's like anytime So
Go ahead.
if you have something like ThingLab where you're building some kind of simulation and there's a couple things that might happen, building those things as methods on an object in a class that you've generated and letting the language just go fast at that, that's great, as opposed to cobbling together a whole bunch of data structures and populating them with data and then having to do a lot.
Actually, my very first thought with that was that there's a data structure pattern that I use frequently, which is building a hash of function pointers to get away from the case statements. To basically replace a case statement with a hash lookup.
Yeah. So why don't you generate a class that has methods?
Right. Exactly. So does somebody else have an answer for the why and when?
No, I think that, the example that Josh gave is a really good one, but I think that that's not the majority of what people use metaprogramming for. What I see people using it for primarily is to reduce repetition or to give syntactic sugar to their APIs. And in those cases, the thing that bothers me the most is that sometimes people start with the idea of what they want their domain language to look like, or what they want to reduce the repetition, or they can envision, at some point there will be repetition because there's going to be lots of methods with similar definitions and things like that. And they go straight away to writing some sort of metaprogrammed code. But for those cases, these are the cases in which there's not, the primary advantage is just making it so that you can write code more succinctly. In those cases, metaprogramming should always be a refactoring step, not an initial design step, for two reasons. One, even if you make something that is this nice dynamic API, whenever it makes sense to do so, it's nice to have a static, simple API underneath it that you build the metaprogramming on top of. And the other reason is that oftentimes your metaprogramming will be shorter but much, much harder to understand. And so the maintainability argument has to be weighed out. You say it's less code and it's less likely that it'll break here or there, but if code is fairly trivial, then you're not really introducing new possibilities of having bugs by just explicitly writing it out statically. I think it's one of those things where that needs to be a trade-off. And sometimes people don't take that into account.
So I'm relieved because when you go ahead, James.
I think I really agree with Greg there that I do try to always do it as a refactoring step. And I'm sure we're all used to, like an extract method refactoring where, we do the same transform in a few places. We see that code's totally identical and we're like, oh yeah, that's extract method. We pull it out into a method, put that chunk of code there, and then we reuse it in all those places, right? Metaprogramming for me is really similar in that I see myself using the same pattern, but it's not quite extract method in that, there's some complex challenges in there where it's going to have to take its cues from where it is or something like that. And then once I see myself doing that, then I will extract, and do some metaprogramming to intelligently do what I intend in each case. But like Greg, I much prefer to do it as a refactoring because I need to see the pain that it's saving me, and I find that helps me do it in the correct way. Whereas if I start from the other side, if I just say, oh, I know I'm going to have this repetition all over the place when I do that, that may even be true, but I don't know exactly what it's going to look like every time yet. So if I try to think through it that way, it's very likely I do it in a non-optimal way.
You're going to do it wrong every time.
I have a metric for that.
What's your metric?
Is that, it's basically that if you are thinking about introducing some metaprogramming, the question that I ask myself is, when a user interacts with whatever the thing I created does, is it going to conceal more questions or more complicated questions than it's going to raise? Because every time you see dynamic code, it's going to raise some questions. It's going to increase the documentation barrier. And the question is the use of this going to make it so that a regular user can intuit or quickly understand my API faster than they would have to understand if I didn't do it that way?
Right. And what I've found is that people, I'm actually glad that you guys said those things because I was worried when you said syntactic sugar that we were going to have a fight on our hands because my reason for monkey patching is almost always I do it whenever I cannot cleanly do or cannot cleanly express what I want to express in the given syntax that I've already been given. But I do it the same way you guys say. It's a refactoring step. If you start out with the monkey patch, if you start out with the metaprogram, then instead of having this crappy repetition all through your code, you have this crappy monkey patch all through your code because it didn't come out organically from it. I was going to add, somebody, I think it was Avdi, asked about rules for metaprogramming, and I wanted to throw on a couple other ones that I use rigorously, which are if you're going to monkey patch something, if you're actually going to put a method on an object, the first thing you should do is test to make sure that a method isn't already there, because there's a.
Then you're not. Then you're not monkey patching.
Well,
if the method isn't already there, you're not monkey patching.
That's using Ruby's open classes instead.
Yeah,
that's just using Ruby the way it's intended.
Yeah, well, okay, so in 186, index, the array index method did not take a block. So if you wanted to say, give me the index of the thing, but here's a block describing the thing that I want, you had to do a 3-line two-step and call detect, which gave you the position, or which gave you the object, and then you had to call index on that thing, and then you had to return the index of that thing. And I rewrote array index to take a block. And if no block was given, it called the original index, and if it was given, then it did the little two-step of detect and index. And I mentioned that. I posted it on my live journal, and I mean, I just got flamed just off the face of the planet for daring to monkey patch array. I mean,
I was probably one of the ones flaming you.
Yeah, and I wrote a week later. I posted back to the blog and basically said, because I actually wrote the title of the live journal post was is this monkey patch good or evil? And people came in and said, that is totally effing evil. And I said, okay, well, hang on. The first thing I did after I wrote this is I wrote a test to see can I call index and pass it a block and get a meaningful result? If I can, don't inject this patch. And sure enough, when 187 came out and patched it, my monkey patch just silently deactivated itself. The second thing I did is I gathered the entire team together and said, guys, look at this. Be aware of this. And we put it in the patch. We had a policy that if you patch anything, you have to put it in lib patches. And it had to be in the name of the class. So lib patches array.rb, basically, so that people know, oh, somebody's monkey patching array. We need to see what's going on in there. And yeah, the communication, letting people know that it's there. So 2 weeks later, I wrote another journal post that basically said, it's good. You can kiss my butt, because they had just released, literally 2 weeks later, my boss called me in and he said, you spent how many days working on that index with the block? Because it's in the standard library. And I'm like, no, it's not. And he pulled up the 187 documentation and said, no, they just added it. Check it out. And so, yeah, index, as 2 weeks after I wrote the patch, I'm not claiming that I inspired anybody or that there was, any kind of, causation, A precedes B, therefore A causes B, not necessarily true. But certainly there was some simultaneous parallel evolution going on. And so I felt pretty good about that.
That was probably one of the other 500 million methods that 187 added.
Well, yeah, they added it, and then they took it out, and then they added it back, and then they took it out.
Now, did you create a module for that?
No, I didn't, because
yeah, so that's the thing I was going to say. There's 2 points, Dave, about what you suggested. One, yes. A respond to check or something like that is almost always insufficient because it doesn't.
Yeah, my test actually passed a block to index, and in 186, if it's unpatched, you pass the block, and it accepts the block and does nothing with it. And so it was really hard to write a valid test.
So it's very hard to actually check and adequately check for that sort of thing. That's why I try to avoid it.
There was an issue with the CARES method in Rails that gave me and a lot of people fits.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done a little bit of that patching myself for like backports from 1.9 just to limit the amount of backports that I've needed to do. But I've found that if you don't get the signature exactly right on things, and several libraries do that, then you may end up getting someone else's backport that isn't exactly compatible with yours.
Right.
And it's very hard to know exactly what the signature of these methods are. I mean, Ruby still isn't like the world's best documented language.
Yeah. Oh, so that was actually raises two more points, and I know Chuck's going to start cutting us off here pretty quick, but the when you talk about monkey patching, people start freaking out and saying that, oh, if you start mixing matching things, then things are going to break in weird ways. And I keep just looking at people and saying it doesn't happen. I mean, well, okay, it does happen. It happens about once a year, right? You combine, you pull down bundler and you combine it with, Ruport or something. I'm not saying bundler and Ruport conflict, but I mean, you pull down two libraries and you find out, nope, they don't work together. Or you pull down, the Beanstalk client and you pull down Simple Cov and JRuby. You pull those down. That's not monkey patching. That's just that Simple Cov hasn't. It depends on coverage, which hasn't been ported to JRuby yet. And this happens about once a year, and it's not. The errors don't happen in like impossible to find. Well, they do happen in kind of impossible to find places. But you shrug and you give up and you find another way to do it. The second thing I was going to say is I did not do it using a module because, and I'm going to confess some ignorance here, I'd never thought about doing that until you mentioned it just now. So
right, that's a really
just
good
improved me.
The module gives you, if you say you create an array and then you mix in whatever the hell you want to it, as long as it's an object that you created, now you can go to town on it and you get the same visual behavior. I mean, it looks basically the same as a monkey patch, but it's localized the effects greatly. And even if you leak those arrays out so that the arrays that pop out are your special arrays, or even if you pollute the arrays that are passed in, at least it's limited to your library. It's isolated to interactions with your library.
And there's another example, or there's another advantage. People can inspect that array, and they can see that it has your patch in my array patches in the ancestor chain.
It's
Whereas
even better.
They cannot see that if you've just reopened object or reopened array.
It's even better than that in 1.9 because you can say object.method and give it the symbol, and it will come back and it will say Dave's weird ass module line 89.
All right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I was going to say we're 46, almost 47 minutes in, and probably should get to the picks.
Let's go for 2 more minutes because I don't have a pick today.
Okay, I have something really concrete that I want to talk about.
Okay,
and that's like do's and don'ts. And so class eval def versus define method.
Define method.
Yeah, define method.
Define method unless you're running a framework and really care about the performance hit that using define method is going to give you.
Right.
Which is almost no one. If you're not building Rails, you don't need to care about that.
Yeah, I generally prefer define method in that particular case. Although I do use class eval sometimes, like if I'm writing an active record module or plugin and I want to do some things like declare a bunch of validations or some associations or things like that, I'll go ahead and just do a class eval so I can open up that class SOAP and just pretend like I'm inside of the model itself and program normally.
Is define method actually slower? I thought class eval was the one where you gave it a big ass string and it had to parse through the whole string and eval it every time. But define method, you gave it like a lambda or a block.
The eval is slower on its own because it has to fire up the parser.
But that only happens once.
On every single call because it has to pull in the closure that define method provides you. Where eval, once something's evaled, works pretty much like you typed it in a file.
Okay, so I'm going to change my stance from always one or always the other to it's a trade-off, and we just discussed what the trade-offs are.
There's also potential for memory leaks when you're using define method.
That's true.
The closure can leak, yeah.
Right. So what were your other questions, Josh?
Well, I mean, no, that was the one concrete issue. Is just do we want to do what do we recommend people do? Class eval def or define method. I tend to stay away from.
One weird, very obscure thing I just want to mention, and we don't even need to discuss it, is if you're working with object space define finalizer, that can be very scary and almost certainly leads to bugs unless you know exactly its idiosyncrasies.
Going back to the define method issue, that it used to be a much bigger problem because blocks couldn't take blocks, right? So that complicated it a lot. But
Yes, it did.
That's mostly gone now. So.
Yeah. So I have one last hard and fast rule to throw out. If I may quote from the Gospel of Beck, which would be the Smalltalk Best Practice Patterns book from the 1990s. Remember, this book is 15 years old. He actually, in one of the chapters, he talks about convenience constructors, which is where you basically monkey patch a class, some other class, to return an instance of your class, like how integer gets monkey patched with the at method to return a point. So you call 3 at 3, and that gives you a point by basically calling a method on integer. And he gives a rule at the very end. He says, in a medium-sized project, you should not do this more than 3 times.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's worth thinking about. You know, it's like if you've monkey patched 58 things in 1,000 lines of Ruby, you're patching too many things.
It's a lot like DHH's rule of once there's 13 things in a list or something like that, then it's too many. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting. Well, we should probably turn it over, but I think the moral of today's lesson was modules are good.
And be responsible, children.
Yeah, it's definitely something that, you can cause not only problems for yourself but for others if you're being reckless with this. But yeah,
Yep.
The modules are awesome.
Yep.
All right, so I am going to take over now and push us toward the picks. For those of you who are new to the podcast, basically picks are just cool stuff that we've run across or have experienced. A lot of times they're related to code and writing code, but sometimes they're just stuff. I think we had like 2 or 3 TV shows or movies or something in as picks in the last one. But we also had some great libraries and stuff recommended as well. So we'll go ahead and start off with Avdi.
All right, so let's see. I think I've got 2. First of all, as a consultant, I find myself working on a lot of different projects, and sometimes it's not convenient to have all of those projects sort of running together on the same machine because a lot of times projects will have little changes that they want to make to the machine, like maybe they want to set up certain DNS aliases or something like that, and or a specific MySQL, they expect a specific MySQL configuration or something like that. So something I've been playing with lately and I'm hoping to use more and more is something called Vagrant. And Vagrant is basically some scripts on top, or it's a project that uses VirtualBox and provisioning tools like Puppet and Chef to basically make it very easy to spin up a new VM for your development environment. And I've basically in free moments over the last couple of weeks, I've been putting together sort of my ideal starting development environment with an eye towards being able to just spin up a new one every time I start a new project, and then it'll be completely isolated, and it won't touch any of the other projects that I have. And the other benefit of using VMs for stuff like that is, it's very easy to then, if you're bringing somebody new in, it's very easy to give them a VM and say, hey, just work on this. Don't worry about the whole long setup process. So Vagrant's very cool. Something else, and I don't know if this has been mentioned. Well, it was mentioned at the beginning of the show. I don't know if it's been mentioned as a pick, but for a while I've been slowly reading my way through the Best of Ruby Quiz, which was edited and I guess a lot of it written by James Edward Gray, and it's just it's a great collection of Ruby idioms and like different people's styles of solving different problems. And a lot of times the topic comes up, where do I go to read other people's code, to learn better styles or different styles, and this is just a great curated collection of other people's code that you can browse and learn from.
All right, those are both terrific picks, and so go check them out. We'll have links at rubyrogues.com. All right, David, go ahead.
So I wasn't kidding when I said I didn't have a pick. I do have an unpick today. I don't want to start anything, I don't want to start some crap here, but I have an unpick for today, which is to say that I've been doing a lot of remote pair programming, and the tool of choice that we use for that are Skype and TeamViewer Pro. And my unpick for today is TeamViewer. I love you guys, TeamViewer. I love you like sliced bread. I love you like cooked food. But the pro version is absolutely it's over $700 per seat. It is absolutely unattainable by anybody on any kind of a single contractor developer budget. So I'm throwing this out to the audience. If there is a good screen sharing thing that's easy to set up, easy to use, allows people to switch sides, allows mutual control, please let me know. I'm at dbrady at Twitter or ratgeyser@gmail.com. I would love to hear if there are some better solutions. Or TeamViewer guys, I love you. If you will tell me how to get a group discount, if we can get this thing down to like $100 a copy, I know I can find a whole bunch of people that would give you some business.
Yep.
That's it.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Greg.
So I've been using IRC Cloud for a couple of weeks, and it's okay. The main reason why I was using it, it's basically a web-based IRC client that persists your connection so that you can see your messages from when you're away and all of that sort of stuff. And it has some other features. But I recently stopped using it because I find their beta to be kind of buggy, and also because like about a year ago, I tried to get away from I used to do everything in the web browser, and then I just sort of went the other direction. Because I find that site-specific applications, oh God, my dog's barking. Yeah, hold on one second. Hey!
Greg's dog disagrees with this pick.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Yeah, so I've been using site-specific applications, which means that I would prefer to do IRC in my own app. So, God, that dog killed me. Sorry. So anyway, so I would
Time to kick ban.
What's that?
Time to kick ban. Yes.
So basically, I would much rather use IRC on its own, either in a command line application, graphical application, doesn't matter. What I wanted to have, which I always thought would be hard, is just to be able to have my messages when I wasn't there and just sort of keep a persistent connection. I found that using GNU Screen plus basically any command line IRC client will do that for you. You could just put it on anywhere that you've got a shell account, and it just works great. And that didn't require really any configuration besides basically typing screen and then typing IRSSI.
Yes.
It's totally worked well. And I mean, I think IRC Cloud is probably well worth it for someone who wants a web-based IRC experience. But if you're just looking for that functionality, you can get it for free, fairly reliably, just by using Screen and any command line IRC client. And a lot of those will allow you to proxy as well. So you could use like, whatever your favorite client is and then connect to a running instance of it. Yep. So that's one pick. The other one that I have, which is completely non-technical, is that I think that people should check out Square Foot Gardening if they haven't. I've been doing that for a couple months now, and it's awesome. Basically, it's a way that you can grow a whole bunch of stuff in tiny 4x4 boxes. And the initial setup of it is a little bit expensive because you have to use sort of a complex blend of soil. But once you do that, because the boxes are lined on the bottom, you get no weeds. And basically all I need to do is water my plants a couple times a week. And I've been eating vegetables from my garden every day for the last few weeks with very minimal work. And it's fun.
That's great.
That's awesome. All right. Yeah, I just spent a lot of time on my garden. All right, James, go ahead.
So I'm going to go with an unusual pick this time as far as a technical pick. But I had somebody email me recently and say, I've been trying to learn Ruby. I've gotten so far, but I'm kind of stuck on some things. And, would you be willing to just come and let me come over, once every couple weeks and show me some stuff. And I hadn't done any mentoring in a while, so I said, sure, why not? Let's do it. And we've been doing that for a bit now. I'm going to do it right after this podcast. And I'm enjoying it. I'm learning a lot and remembering how much fun it is to mentor somebody, and they're getting the hang on things they were stuck with. So I've forgotten how valuable mentoring is, and I think it's really wonderful in our community. So my advice is if you're on a low level and you would like to gain some knowledge, ask somebody, who has it that you could get it from. A lot of us don't mind teaching and helping you over a hump or something. And usually we learn things from doing it too. I learn things about, areas where we're doing a bad job of teaching certain things, or, what kinds of help people need, or I try to find new ways to explain things, which helps me when I give conference talks or do trainings or whatever. So I think it's helpful for both sides, and everybody learns a lot. So ask somebody, or if you're at the higher level, maybe offer your services to somebody. I think it's a good thing that you can do for our community. So that's my first recommendation. Mentoring, do it or get involved with it. I think it's valuable. And then as far as books, if there's any fantasy readers out there, I hope you found George R.R. Martin by now. If you haven't, you need to. That's his main series, The Song of Ice and Fire. It starts with a book called The Game of Thrones. The 5th book in the series just came out, A Dance with Dragons, and I just got it in the mail, so I admit I'm not through it yet, but absolutely love that series. So if you're into great fantasy, I think you can't go wrong with The Song of Ice and Fire. And I do just need to say that it's a very adult series, so if that kind of thing bothers you, there's a lot of things in it that could definitely be taken as objectionable. So you stand warned, but if that doesn't scare you off, then go read it. You'll love it. And Greg is telling me that mentoring people should talk to the RMU people on Freenode, which is, of course, that's exactly what RMU does. So that's a great point. You should definitely go hang out in Pound RMU on Freenode. That's a great place to find mentors or become a mentor. So yeah, good stuff.
Greg, is RMU on Freenode a good place for somebody who's not an RMU alumnus but a fairly senior dev? Would that be a good thing to come in there and hang out and chill out and help people?
Absolutely. We actually have a lot of people who hang out in that room from both sides, people who are looking to learn and people who are willing to help because they know that that's what our program is all about. So we have this sort of extended network. And the thing that I just sort of pinged James about over IM was that we're gradually expanding our mentoring program so that we can start taking people in and doing hour-long sessions or something like that instead of our crazy 20-hour-a-week, 3-week-long course that we typically put people through.
Yeah.
And having people around just in the room would be very helpful. I mean, it is worth keeping in mind that we have specific goals in mind, so it's a good idea to lurk a little bit and see how we work, or just to talk to me. But at the same time, we've got some great people from the Ruby community who aren't directly involved in RMU helping out with our students. And as long as we keep it a good environment for learning, I would definitely welcome people to do that.
Because I've hung out with Brandon Hayes and Ashish Dikshit from RMU, and I've given them tips and pointers, but I've always had to kind of be very circumspect and say, I'm not part of the curriculum, so I might be giving you bad advice.
Yeah, the RMU channel in general, I think that people who are just interested in helping others out they're more than welcome to come. Cool. I mean, you just might want to check in with us and see what we're doing or whatever. Yeah. But other than that, yeah, absolutely, we welcome help.
All right. Sounds good, and it's always good to have another place where you can get help. Josh, go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. My sound good now? Okay.
Yeah.
So my first pick is, let's see, if you're listening to this on Friday, the coming weekend is the Rails 3.1 Hackfest. And this is organized by some Rails core team people, and it's going to be a weekend of doing a lot of focused development effort around the 3.1 release. So there's a post on weblog.rubyonrails.org about it, and a lot of cities, there are a lot of places where there are places where you can go and hang out with people. I see a list of like 20 or 30 right here. Here in San Francisco, both Heroku and Mocha Leaf are going to be hosting places. Pivotal Labs is doing it in Boulder, Shopify in Ottawa, Pivotal Labs in New York. There's all over the place. There, Hash Rocket in Chicago. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and all weekend people are going to be porting their apps to Rails 3.1 and working on fixing bugs and working on documentation if you're not comfortable working on the Rails 3.1 code base. So lots to do around there, and it should be, if enough people get involved and contribute, then the 3.1 release should probably come pretty soon.
That sounds terrific.
Yeah, so that's one pick. And then my other pick is, since you're listening to this on a podcast, you may appreciate knowing about another podcast, which is Escape Pod. And this is my favorite science fiction podcast. This has been going on for years. And they have so many stories that they've podcasted, and it's just free, and they have some awesome stories. It was started by Steve Ely, and he did just a great job for years, and then he turned it over to some people who could be more focused on it. I think Steve is now doing Ruby on Rails development somewhere, so maybe he's even listening to this podcast now. So hi, Steve. Thanks for all the great work on Escape Pod. So yeah, just go check it out. It's on iTunes. escapepod.org is the URL for the site. And they even have some sister podcasts like Pseudopod and Podcastle for different genres. But check it out.
I second that. That's a great one.
All right. I guess it's my turn. So the first thing is I've been working a bit with Cassandra, trying to learn it. And what I've been doing, I couldn't find a terrific source of information until I picked up Cassandra, the Definitive Guide. It's an O'Reilly book, and it's really, really breaks things down to the point where I really kind of got my head around how it worked and how the schema worked. And so I recommend that one. And then the other one that I want to recommend is something that I've been using off and on for a while, but I just never really thought about how much it offers, but it's the jQuery UI library. It's a JavaScript library, and it basically provides a bunch of extensions to JavaScript that do some of the nice functionality that you want in there. For example, the last one I had to do, I was using vertical sliders, so I just went in, I found an extension, or no, sliders are part of the core. So I just went in and I set up the sliders, and yeah, and it'll select a value between 0 and 10. Or another one that I had to do recently was sorting a list by dragging and dropping, and yeah, that took me all of like 2 minutes to hook up. It took me longer to write the handler method, the callback that it makes to the server, than it did to actually get it so that you could move stuff up and down. So those are my picks. They're both code related. Sorry, but that's what I've been up to lately, and yeah, I've really been impressed with the work that's gone into both Cassandra and jQuery UI. So that's pretty much that. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap up the show here. I want to thank our panelists for coming and sharing their experience with us. There was definitely a lot there, and I think this is going to be one of those episodes where I have to listen to it again just to make sure I got everything and understand what's there. But the recommendations that were made were just amazing and awesome. So I just want to thank everybody for coming. We have in no particular order, Josh Susser.
Woohoo! First.
David Brady.
Use modules, kids.
Avdi Grimm.
It's been great.
Gregory Brown.
Been fun.
James Edward Gray.
It was a geek explosion this week.
It was. And
There's geek all over the walls.
Yeah, and I'm Charles Max Wood. Hopefully next week you can come back. We'll be talking about something interesting. We don't have a topic pick for next week, so we'll have to surprise you. But anyway, thanks for listening, and we will catch you next week. You can get the show notes at rubyrogues.com. You can find us in iTunes, and go ahead and leave us a review there. I'm probably going to try and get us into some of the other podcast aggregators. So if you've been pulling the feed down onto your Zune or something, then hopefully we can get listed there pretty quick. But that's it. So we will catch you next week, and thanks for listening.
Bye.